Hello everyone. Uh, we are back in the Flutter Engage Extended Tunisia. With us is Mr. Faisal Abid. Welcome, Mr. Faisal.
Hi everyone.
So, Mr. Faisal Abid is a Google expert, and is a CEO and founder of a startup called Irons in Canada. So he will talk about the strategies to port your Android iOS app to Flutter. So, Mr. Faisal, you can start.
Thanks, Yassine. Hi everyone. It's great to be speaking at Flutter Tunisia and Flutter Engage Extended. I wanted to talk about strategies to port your Android and iOS app to Flutter. This talk really comes from a lot of experience that I've had taking existing Android apps or iOS apps and kind of moving them to Flutter. The big problem that a lot of companies face is when they're working on Android and iOS separately, and then something like Flutter or other technologies come around, is they're always afraid of, we're going to have to rewrite our entire application and merge, all those years of code that we've written. It's going to go away. It's going to cause bugs. It's going to have all sorts of issues. So let's not go to Flutter. Let's not go to React Native, for example. We just don't want to invest in that because we don't want to get rid of all 10 years of work that we've done. So a lot of companies like that came to me and they said, Flutter is a really cool technology. We've prototyped it. It's really fun. But how can we possibly move our entire Android and iOS stack to Flutter? And so I work with the company, and we're going to be talking about about 4 or 5 strategies on how to port over your Android and iOS app. And these 4 and 5 strategies come from this playbook that I've built. While working with all these clients, it's just the same patterns that I see. So what you can do with these techniques is you're able to basically follow these 5 steps and go, okay, this is the way I'm going to take my existing Android app or my existing iOS app. And if I follow these 5 steps, then I can successfully port over my Android and iOS app to Flutter. So let's get started with step number 0. And I say this is 0 because it's not something I always recommend, but it's something that is very useful and companies might actually want it. And that is add to app. What add to app is a simple way of integrating your Flutter into an existing application. What do I mean by that? Imagine you have an Android app or an iOS app, doesn't matter. And your app is say a to-do list manager, right? A to-do list, which is just, you write what you're going to do every day and you check off those boxes and it says, congrats, you're done. Say you want to make this into a Flutter app. Your boss says, absolutely not. We're not going to, get rid of all the code. But if there's a way we can write new code in Flutter, then we're okay with that. What add to app lets you do is let you keep your existing Android and iOS app, but bring over all new features can be built in Flutter. If you're an Android developer, you might know that this is basically an activity. So if your Android app is going activity, and then the user clicks a button and another activity pops up, user clicks a button and a third activity pops up, that third activity could be a Flutter app, could be an entire Flutter view that shows up. Because Flutter, at the end of the day, for those that don't know it, it's just a view on Android and iOS. And so if you can take that view, you can actually bring that view into any application and it will still work. I don't recommend it because then you're maintaining 2 separate applications and you have to do sort of this weird GitHub flow where you have to have a central repo for your Flutter. You have to have 2 different iOS and Android applications. It gets confusing. However, it is an easy way to do it. This is how simple you can do it in Android. You type in start Flutter engine. and then you build your application, and then it works, right? You click a button and it started the application. So it's a fairly easy way to actually integrate this. However, it's not something I recommend, which is why it's always option 0. It's always just good to kind of prototype with this. But to actually start building your Flutter app, I think you need to follow these 5 steps. So let's get rid of this step. And let's go to step number 1. Step number 1 is all about auditing your dependencies. And what I mean by that is, typically, most Android applications don't really have a big issue when they want to be, or iOS applications, don't have a big issue when they're being rewritten to Flutter. However, there are some applications which have very unique needs. For example, you might be an application that tracks users when they go into stores, right? So your application is using GPS along with some third-party SDK that whenever a user walks into a store, the app emits saying, hey, Faisal just walked into this pharmacy. Faisal just walked into this grocery store, right? Or this flower shop. Now, that SDK might not exist on Flutter, right? If you go to pub.dev, that's where all your SDKs are. That's where all your libraries are for Flutter. Maybe if pub.dev doesn't have an SDK to track when a user goes to a store, but Android and iOS do. So what I recommend is, it's not that you can't port it over. We'll talk about how you can port this over. What I recommend is make a list. Write down all the dependencies that exist on your Android and iOS app, and write down if the integration exists on pub.dev. If it does, you're good. You have nothing to do. If it doesn't, what you have to do is you have to build a plugin. And we're going to be talking about plugins a lot in this talk. Basically, a plugin is a simple way that lets you interact with the Android and iOS world. What does that mean? When you're running a Flutter app, you have your phone, and then you have the Flutter app. You have your Android OS or iOS OS, then you have the Flutter app running on top of it. The Flutter app is drawing its own view. Think of it like a game engine, right? If you've ever played like Angry Birds or any of these other games, all it's doing is it's drawing pixels on the screen. Flutter works identically the same way. It's basically a game engine for apps. However, sometimes you need access to Android or iOS SDKs. So Flutter team built a way for you to take your take your Flutter app and be able to talk to the Android and iOS SDKs, right? And the Java, Kotlin, Objective-C, you're able to actually communicate with them. And so what this means is if you have SDKs that aren't available on Pub, you can actually write a plugin that you can write some Java, Kotlin, Objective-C, or Swift code and get your Flutter app to actually talk to that code directly using a message bus system. And there's documentation to that on Flutter. You can just search up Flutter plugins, and you'll be able to read the entire documentation, how it's done, right? At a high level, this is how it looks. You have your framework, which is material design widgets. Then you have the widget framework. Then you have rendering, animation, painting, gestures, and then you have services and plugins at the bottom, right? Those services and plugins are actually talking to the Java, the C++, Objective-C, all that code that already exists on Android and iOS. So you can start leveraging that, and you can actually start talking to native code. So you don't have to, find dependencies for on Pub. You can just bring your dependencies from from Android and iOS, and just use them. This is how simple it is to call an SDK. You can say channel.invoke method, call radar code, and radar code is just a method name that I've given. And then at the bottom, you'll see that that's actually Java code, right? And the Java code is saying, if the user wants call radar code, then run your entire radar dependency there and then return the results of that, right? And right off the bat, you've automatically gotten a way to get to talk to your native code, even if it doesn't exist on pub.dev. So that's cool. But the other big part is business logic, right? You have an issue with if you've written 10 years or 5 years or even just 2 years or even like 2 months of code, there are probably a lot of business logic there, right? And sometimes developers don't write unit tests. Sometimes you just aren't able to because you're moving so fast. I totally understand that. And what happens is you have weird hacks in your code. You have, things that aren't properly documented. So now it's time to rewrite all that code for Dart. That's a huge risk. How do you know your code's going to run fine if you don't have unit tests? And so one of the things I recommend and one of the things I've done in practice is we actually take all that business logic and we encapsulate it as a plugin. Just like what we did with that Java and iOS dependency, we do the same thing here. We actually create our own plugin for our business logic. So for example, I'll show you the demo later, but for example, say you have a music app, right? And what you can do with this music app is, say you have like a sorting algorithm, something that shuffles all your music. But it's a very complicated shuffling algorithm. It might take it takes like quantum randomness into account. Instead of rewriting all that in Dart, you can just create a plugin and you can bring all that Java code in. And just like what we did there, where we said call radar code, we can do the exact same thing here. We can say call my quantum shuffling algorithm. And when you call your quantum shuffling algorithm, it will call Java and it will call Objective-C, and it will run that code that already exists. And then it will just return the result back. So you can get away with writing all sorts of business logic, right? There's a live demo, but I'm going to skip over the live demo. I don't think it's actually needed for this because we already talked about the plugin. However, if you have questions regarding plugins, please ask in the comments, and then after this talk, I'll talk about it. Cool. So next is the user migration. Now, this is where things start to get a bit tricky. One of the hard parts when you have an app that's already running is when your user upgrades your app to Flutter, you want to be able to bring that user back to the you don't want the user to log out, right? You want the user to come back to the app and be logged in, but automatically be upgraded to the Flutter world. So think about user migration. It's very complicated to do this at the very end because you've already built your entire app architecture in a certain way, and then you go, oh no, I have to think about how to migrate my old users from something like SQLite or Core Data. How am I going to bring all those users to using something somewhere in Flutter, right? So think about the user migration story. It's very important. One of the things you can do is you can actually go to Pub and use a library database. Use a library called Hive. And Hive is a very powerful secure NoSQL database. And what Hive will let you do is you will be able to write another plugin. This is the whole game in porting your application is writing plugins, right? You'll be able to write another plugin, and what this plugin will do is it will actually query Core Data or SQLite, and it will bring all that data to the Flutter world. And then using Hive, you can actually create your entire database schema here. This way, you're not depending on Core Data or SQLite anymore. You're managing everything in the Flutter world. And that's a very important thing. While these are good solutions, what I'm recommending, writing a plugin, for example, it's not something I recommend for the long term. All these are just ways for you to migrate your application over to Flutter make sure it's working, not waste a lot of developer time. But then you slowly have to migrate all this code to the Flutter world. You don't want to be stuck with business logic forever lying in the Dart world, I mean the Java or Objective-C world, because what will happen is you will run into bugs and it will be very hard to track down, right? So the faster you can bring that code slowly over to the Flutter world, the better it is. This just gives you more time to actually write unit tests. It gives you more time to figure out how your application Flutter is performing in the real world before you move over all your legacy business code to Flutter. So think about your user upgrade story. Very, very important. I know so many people get burnt by this. I know a company that launched and then they started freaking out because they were saying, well, all their users logged out and now they can't log in because they don't remember their password, because most users do not remember their passwords, right? And then what they do is they start hassling customer support. Customer support gets frustrated and people start thinking this is Flutter's fault when it's not Flutter's fault. Flutter has nothing to do with user migration, right? This is just because we didn't think through that this might be a problem. And so do consider user migration. That's like the number one thing you should think of. Next, analytics migration, right? This is very, very interesting. I'll tell you a story. Basically, when we moved over this company's application, it was a company that was selling goods, right? They were selling like T-shirts. And so we tested out, does buying T-shirts work? And buying T-shirts did work. And we put in in-app purchase. Everything was working fine. We tested it like a million times, right? Everyone in the company tested this. We launched the app. Things seem to be going fine. I see on Google Play dashboard in-app purchases coming in. I'm happy that everything's working. Migration's going smoothly. And then I get an email from the CFO saying, there's no sales. Sales are breaking. And I start getting confused, and I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I can see, I go make a purchase. I'm like, purchase is working. So what is the issue here? The issue actually turned out to be that when we did analytics, the way Flutter, like if you've built an Android app before, an iOS app before, you know how they work. They're either fragments, activities, UI view controllers. And so there's sort of this pattern that you build from. Flutter has a different pattern you build from, right? Flutter doesn't have the idea of activities. It has the idea of routes and widgets. And sometimes in one widget, you're able to hide a widget, show another widget. You do all sorts of different flows. And so the way this worked for this company was user lands on a screen, then the user presses buy on T-shirt. It goes to the next screen. The user puts in how many T-shirts they want. And the third screen, they purchase. So this company, the CFO, built an entire pipeline using Google Analytics for different screen views. Now, on Flutter, the way we built it was, while it looked identical, it was all actually just one widget. We just turned on and off different sub-widgets inside of it just to make it cleaner. The architecture was better that way for us. But it only triggered one screen view event. So whenever the user tried to click something, it only triggered one event. And so the CFO, looking at this funnel, started seeing that, wait a minute, no one's actually going to the checkout screen, so there's no purchasing happening. And that he gave me a call, I spoke to him, and then we realized that, well, it turns out it's the analytics that's the issue. And so remember to do analytics migration. And if you know that things are going to break because you designed the application differently, let the stakeholders know, right? Reach out to management and tell them that, listen, from this day on, analytics are going to be different. So I want you to keep that in mind before we launch. Lastly, do the UI last, right? The UI will never be your bottleneck. So never never start off by doing the UI when you're doing a migration job, because there's so many things that can go wrong that you always want to make sure that you do the UI at the very, very end. And during this time, this is what I recommend you do. If you go back to the first step, um, on step zero or step one, reach out to your designers and tell your designers that, hey, we're going to be taking 6 weeks to figure out how to migrate this app. You have 6 weeks to come up with a new design or refine your existing designs. Because honestly, with Flutter, you can do a lot of very interesting things that you cannot do, or it takes very long with Android and iOS. So the designers have more flexibility. So tell the designers, you have 5, 6 weeks now to come up with a better design. So by the time you go through all these steps, right, you're writing plugins, your business logic, you're doing all this, when you get to five, there's a whole new fresh coat of paint on your app. And you're able to take that and you're able to start doing UI development. There's two good reasons for this. Designers get time, and then when you show your stakeholders, you can show them all this fancy animations. The app looks better. Everyone will think, wow, Flutter is just great. Flutter made our app look better. No, it's the designers that did the job. But people will just think it's Flutter because it's this whole new way, this new UI that you're representing in Flutter. Plus, the animations and stuff that you can do in Flutter are very powerful. And so these are the 5 steps. We have some time actually, so I do encourage you to ask me questions, and we can go over your questions. But in terms of final thoughts, oops, right? When you're building an application, here's the playbook you should follow. Think about add to app. See if it makes sense for your application. I know for a lot of companies that might be the best way to go down. Like you can see Facebook did this with React Native, where there's some parts of the application that's in Android and iOS Objective-C, and then some parts of the application are actually in React Native. So you can follow that pattern and you can do the same thing with Flutter. Audit your dependencies, build plugins, encapsulate your business logic. Very, very key. Um, User migration, do not forget about that, because you don't want to launch your app and have all your user base logged out. You can't even revert a build, right? So it's just gone in the world. Analytics migration, make sure that you migrate your analytics properly, and you tell your business stakeholders that things are going to be different. Lastly, UI development, do the UI at last, right? You don't want to do it at the start. It's just a waste of time. Things are going to change anyways. There's a lot more higher priority things. So focus on all that. And then at the very end, do UI development. So with that, I want to say thank you for listening to this talk. This talk, I've done it a couple times, and there's always some interesting questions. So if you have any interesting questions, please let me know. Otherwise, you can tweet to me at Faisal Abid, or you can email me at faisal.abid@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer your questions. I'm happy to look over any code that you might be running into any issues with, and keep on fluttering. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. It was a very good speech. So there's not a question right
Okay.
now. So thank you very much.
No problem. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to help. And thank you for inviting me to speak here.
Welcome, Mr. Faisal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
So everyone, Basim gonna speak at 7 p.m. So see you there.